Anuttama Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Gopal Bhatta. Pleased to be here with you today.
So this is a little bit of a series, get to know the GBC members. We've interviewed, I think, 8 or 7 members so far. We really thank you for your valuable time. And of course, as we get into it, I think the audience is going to find out that your time is really full. You live a full life. Maybe just to let the audience know a little bit about you. You are a famous person, traveling so much, giving classes, but there may be some viewers that don't know you so well. Give us a little bit of a background on how you came to Krishna consciousness and what you currently do, like that.
Certainly. Well, maybe a little bit how I came to Krishna consciousness first. I was a college student. Actually, I first met the devotees in a high school religion class when I was in 12th grade, about 17 years old. And I was in an economics class, and I didn't like the students that were in that class. And all of my friends happened to be signed up for a religion class. I had no interest whatsoever in religion. I didn't like religion. I didn't like religious people. But all my friends were in that class. So I signed up for the class. And it turned out to be like a very interesting experience. I never knew anything about Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or all these great, spiritual, philosophical traditions. So it opened my mind and my eyes to a lot of things. Then I went to college for a couple of years. I was studying social science and political science, thinking, let's make the world a better place. This was in the early 1970s, right after the 60s. So a lot of energy among young people to make the world better. But I became kind of growingly frustrated. One, the party scene didn't make me as happy as it was supposed to. And second of all, I found the information I was learning didn't really have any answers. I remember my favorite teacher, I asked him one time, I said, okay, we're studying all these great philosophers, Marx and Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau, all these people, but they all have so many theories, but why don't we study the truth of them? Let's figure out if these ideas are true. Because if they are, then, I'm ready to follow that. And my teacher, my favorite university professor, responded, I'll never forget, he said, we are not here to study truth. So that's when I thought, okay, it's time to move on. So then I quit college. I traveled around the country for a while. I went to Buddhist retreats and I visited the Krishna temple sometimes, even while I was in college. And then after a few months, I went and settled at the ISKCON temple in Boulder. And I made a promise to myself that night. I said, look, I know there's something spiritual to be pursued. I don't know what it is. I don't know if this is the right place, but I prayed, okay, Krishna, Rama, Buddha, Jesus, whoever you are, I don't know where you are. But if you want me to be here, keep me here. And I promised myself I'm not going to go back to college, back to my girlfriend, back to my job. I'm only going forward. So if this isn't the right place, I'll go somewhere else. But unless I find it's wrong, I'm staying here. So that was 45 years ago, and I'm still here because I haven't proven it wrong. And it keeps getting better and better.
And when did you become a GBC?
Around 1999, there was a process in those days. You kind of came on as kind of a trial period, and then it was official. So it was around 99. I'm not sure which year actually became a voting member, but 1999.
And your initial slate of effort was communications. I guess you even had as your mentor Mukunda Maharaj, and then that you just found. It's like you found your thing, I guess, and have done a tremendous job with it. Give us an understanding of what you're doing and the importance of that on a worldwide basis.
Yeah, well, first you mentioned Mukunda Maharaj, and I want to offer my obeisances unto him and recognize all the work that he'd done for so many years. He's a wonderful devotee and a mentor and really a visionary. So, communications in the basic idea behind it, we have our vision and our mission statement, which is in shortened version, ISKCON is a respected and influential organization and culture all over the world. And at this point, we're not respected everywhere and we're not influential everywhere, some places more than others. But the goal is that this is really what Prabhupada's movement is meant to be. We're meant to be respected. We're meant to be influential. Because we know, Krishna has a plan for the world, and Lord Chaitanya wants to see the world re-spiritualized. Prabhupada, we all know the glorious history of our Founder-Acarya. But oftentimes, I experienced in my early years and still today, devotees tend to think we kind of do this like we're separate from society. Sometimes you hear people make a joke about there's the ISKCON fort, and then you let down the drawbridge in the morning, and we all go out and do Harinam or distribute books. And then we come back at night, put the gates up on the fort. And maybe that's an old example, but sometimes our mentality is somewhat like that. And communication is completely different. The idea is we've got something very valuable to share. We need to go out and meet people and interact with people. Mm-hmm. And we have this particular term called key audiences, which means understanding there's groups of people and individuals that can help us in our mission or hurt us. You know, the government people, politicians, police, neighbors, devotees, parents, devotees, congregational members. And we need to build good relationships with those people, those groups, and look for what we call win-win. You know, we need to, if we're going to have a nice Rath Yatra, we have to have a good relationship with the police department. And if the police think we're great, then they're happy to facilitate a wonderful parade. And if they think we're trouble, we don't follow the rules, and then they're not going to help us. So communications is based on that idea of, you know, there's people who can help us. Let's build relationships and, you know, get their help moving things on.
So in one sense, our philosophy is just juxtaposed and almost, if you would, at war with the material world. On the other hand, can we actually thrive and exist if we don't have a relationship with the host cultures that we're living with? And so how do we kind of like, we don't want to get affected by that material energy, yet at the same time, we really do have to relate with them, and otherwise they literally can crush us in some ways. So how did you accomplish that, and how does your format deal with that?
Well, I don't know if I've accomplished much, but at least, you know, the discipline, the concept is, first of all, I would adjust your opening statement just a little bit. I don't think we're at war with the material world. I think we're at war with materialistic consciousness, whether it's in my heart or whether it's in my temple or in the Hare Krishna movement, or, you know, in our neighbors of the world, the politicians and all. So I think really ISKCON is all about, Krishna consciousness is all about transformation. And we're supposed to be transforming our hearts, and we're also supposed to be endeavoring to help transform the world. So with that perspective, and one reason I'm a Krishna devotee, I didn't like when I went to church and they told me, you know, these people are saved and these people are not. And when I, you know, heard from Jewish people, you know, some, not everybody, but there's a tendency to say, you know, we're the chosen people and those people are not. Or when I was involved with like various kind of like liberation efforts as a college student, it's like, okay, we're gonna help the Latinos or the blacks or the whites for all that matter, but not the other people. And all of that rubbed me wrong. But when I became a devotee, when I studied Prabhupada's books, I found it so holistic and inclusive. It's about lifting everything up. So, you know, we're not foolish. We understand there's a lot of very destructive and harmful things, harmful habits, people that have bought into harmful lifestyles. We know those are not good things, but underneath all of that, you know, there's a spirit soul, and they're all ultimately connected with Krishna. And I've had experiences, like one of the things I do for fun, I go to anti-cult conferences pretty regularly. You know, and these are people, I mean, their ethic is that there's bad groups out there, and we were still, some people's minds still include in that, you know, we're bad people. And, you know, we brainwash people, and our leaders are completely manipulative, and people are, you know, mindless robots in the temple. And it's like, well, I mean, that's obviously ignorant. So I, you know, it's a long story, but I reached out to make relationships with those people. I started going to their conferences and sat in meetings with them. And they said, well, you Christians, you've done A, B, and C wrong. And some situations say, you're right. We did A, B, and C wrong. And here's what we've done to fix A, and we don't do B anymore. And we're working on C, or thanks for bringing that to my attention. Let's see what we can do about it. But by the way, you know, are you aware that we've done, you know, E, F, and G, these positive things, and let's have a, you know, more open relationship there. So I think that's, you know, the ethic that we are in the world. We can make a positive difference, but we can't do it, you know, being too isolated. Your second question is about how do we not be effective. I don't know if you want me to respond to that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. I mean, you know, first of all, we all know if I don't go deep in my own Krishna consciousness, then I'm like the example of the tree that has deep roots. The big storm comes, it's not affected. So we have to go very deep in our chanting and our reading and our sadhana, and especially in our relationships with devotees. That's got to be very deep. And I think kind of a natural, I think it's as when we mature in our Krishna consciousness, we really see how Krishna is inspiring different people in different ways. I mean, I've got a lot of very close Muslim friends, and people who I found are deeply spiritual and religious and devoted to God. And they've got a different philosophy than we have. They've got a different understanding, but they're deep about that. And I know obviously a lot of Vaishnavas. I wouldn't be here. There's a lot of Vaishnavas that are very, very deep in their spiritual process. And we also have some people that aren't so deep. It's like, it's a process. It's an awakening. Our whole Krishna consciousness, this idea of it's an awakening. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to help everybody up the ladder, really in a non-discriminatory way. And that's the kind of thing that really excites me about being devotee, because it is so inclusive. I don't want to live in a world or in a community that says, we've got it all and nobody else knows anything, or we're right and they're wrong. Rather say, well, here's what we know, and how can we share it with you? And what can you share with us? How can we learn from you?
Mm. I'd like to just shift. It will come back to your GBC work in a bit, but I know that you, for years and years, have traveled so extensively. Off the top of my head, not knowing everywhere that you've gone and how long you've gone, maybe I'm going to say that you've traveled between 180 and 200 days out of every year. Is it about that much?
Not this year.
Not this year. That's what I'm going to get to. But generally, that's how much you've traveled, leading seminars, working with everybody.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, all of that stopped. How are you carrying on?
As we are today, Zoom conference.
And has it been effective?
It's definitely been different. I think the whole world's learning. In America, there's a presidential race coming up, right? And they're talking about how there's no conventions and big auditoriums full of cheering people with funny looking hats on their heads, and they're trying to figure out how are we going to do this all virtual. So yeah, it's been effective. There's been challenges. I think I've actually seen in some ways my national and global responsibilities have actually kind of gotten easier to do. And maybe this is just my emphasis at this time, I'm not sure. But like I'm having weekly conference calls with leaders in communication ministry in South America, Europe, Africa, India, Australasia, that we didn't do before. Maybe the ability was there, but until this COVID thing came, it's kind of forced us to realize, hey, we can be talking with each other, working on things on a global level. And then, I probably need to do more of this, but then some of the temples I'm responsible for, I can do a Sunday feast from here, lecture. I can do some things like, for Janmashtami or this or that. So it really has kind of opened the door for opportunities. And my strength is not technology, but I'm trying to allow myself to be dragged along with it as best I can.
So as a GBC member, you have distinguished yourself as always working on, number one, your ministry, the communications ministry. Number two, taking care of your zone. And number three, taking on numerous what you might call global initiatives. You're a member of the GBC Organizational Development Committee. You're a member of the Nominations Committee. You're a member of the Constitution Committee, which is, directly related to the Organizational Development Committee. I think you're a founding member and an active participant in the Guru Services Committee. How do you keep all of these balls in the air? You've got so many things going on. How do you do all this?
Well, first, it's funny to have you asking this question, Gopal, because you're one of the people that I look to and say, how does he do it? But maybe next week I'll interview you. I don't know who's interviewed you yet, but since
nobody. we like it like that.
We'll talk about it. I can ask some questions too, but on this one, since you're asking me, Buddy Reinmarsh, who's also, a very highly productive GBC member, I've heard him answer this question in a joking way, and he says, it's easy, you do all of them poorly. I don't know, that's not the best answer. But and you know, and I'm sure if you took a poll, you'd say whatever. I've got maybe a dozen temples I oversee. You're probably going to have a couple people say, "Gosh, he's really involved and he's there every time I call him." And you're going to have other people saying, "Well, you know, I haven't talked to him in quite a while." So I'm not doing as well as I could. I would say, and theoretically, let's start with there. I think we need more systems. I think that, you know, ISKCON, we've all seen, it's a fantastic philosophy. It's a wonderful culture. The revelations about God and devotional life are just so profound. You know, the food and the music in so many ways it's you know, wonderful. It's wonderful, and it's kind of in a sense ahead of the pack. You know, as I mentioned before, we should appreciate other people's contributions, but some of ours are really, really cutting edge, ahead of, you know, transcendental ultimately. But in other ways, you know, we're not where we need to be. You know, Prabhupada's 7 purposes, the first one he said to systematically propagate spiritual knowledge to society at large, etc. So Prabhupada wanted things done systematically. He had a limited amount of time. So, I mean, I enjoyed trying to help put those systems in place, but I don't have as good a systems worked out as I could. I feel, in terms of my oversight of temples, my understanding of the GBC is to kind of help and in some cases particularly share some vision and support for the presidents. So I really feel that that's my particular kind of model. I don't think the GBC is meant to be so much, and it's different. Different people have different moods and different capacities, perhaps. I don't see myself so much as kind of a dominant personality comes and says, this is where this whole zone's going. I'm more in the mood of like, if there's temple presidents, I've got some very qualified ones. By the way, 5 or 6 are women. I'm quite proud of that. And they're very good. And, you know, if there was a competition between temple presidents, you know, I'd put any of my women temple presidents against any man around the world and check off their qualities and their success. And I think many people would be reaffirmed in their conviction that women can serve Krishna very well. And some would be quite surprised who maybe don't understand the capacities that women have as leaders. But so within these different communities, I really feel my role is to support the temple president largely and the community. You know, these days we've got board of directors, we've got so many senior devotees. It's not like it was 40 years ago. The temple president was a year or 3 or 5 years older than everybody else and kind of, you know, told everybody what to do. I think the president, especially the GBC, is supposed to kind of help those communities develop their own identity and achieve what they want to. And with that said, I do a fair amount of troubleshooting. You know, there's a problem, there's relationship issues, you know, then it's like, okay, I'm on the phone more with that particular place. So that's as far as, you know, the kind of regional responsibilities part of it.
Let's just drill down for a minute or two on Constitution. What is the Constitution Committee doing and what's its importance?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. I'm an American citizen, and you know, I actually walk around in my in my briefcase. I carry a copy of the U.S. Constitution, which I look at from time to time. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and Washington is because it's the nation's capital. People are very focused, whether they're political leaders or NGOs, you know, non-government organizations or religious communities. They're very much aware of what is this charter? What is this Constitution? What does it allow us to do, not allow us to do? What are the boundaries? How does it help us as citizens and as organizations? So in ISKCON, Prabhupada said that he wanted us to have a constitution, which is a document that is put together with expertise and some contributions from leaders around the world. How actually do we clarify the roles and the responsibilities of ISKCON leaders? How do our institutions work together? Relationships between temples and the GBC. Of course, Prabhupada's preeminent role needs to be enshrined, you know, in one place where you can go and see that. So the Constitution Committee, it's one of those efforts been going on, frankly, for some years. It's a committee that's kind of been reformulated a few times because it's not an easy thing to do. It's a serious document, and it's something that certainly can be amended, and that's part of the process. Is how do you make changes in the future? At the same time, it needs to be something very serious that gives guidance for devotees all around the world. So it's something that, you know, takes some time, and there's a committee we're meeting on once a week. And we've already presented, I think we're on our 4th draft. presenting to the GBC, and we're kind of getting to the point where then we go out further. We say, okay, we go to the Sabha and maybe to the SAC and to temple presidents all around the world at some point. Say, hey, here's we're kind of moving ahead. What are your thoughts? How can we make this even better? So it's an important effort, and something that I think the generation of Prabhupada disciples needs to make sure is intact before we all head off to other preaching realms.
Does it have something to do with, like, if we look at the countries of the world, and we see some countries are very strong on what you would call, this is a country that is operating under the rules of law, so to speak. And you see other countries, they're operating under the law is the dictator, or the law is a small group of people. And as a general statement, does this have something to do with this Constitution, that our society should be operating under what you might call the rules of law?
Absolutely. Thank you. I like the way you put that. And it's critically important. We all know we live in the age of Kali, right? This is the age of love and trust. We see that manifesting all over the planet, in organizations and in political relationships and all of that. So it's extremely important we do that. And I will add this, as a religious organization, I think perhaps it's even more important, because as religious people or spiritual people, we're people very much largely often dictated by our heart and by our inspiration. And sometimes that may or may not be so well founded in Shastra, or even in practical reality. Prabhupada also said we should be logical. So some things he talked about, don't get too caught up in your logic. And other times he said we have to use your logic to understand Krishna. I just heard on a tape the other day, Prabhupada said we can understand God by logically understanding the nature of the soul, because God's the supreme soul, and we have qualities like God. So essential for us to have systems in place, and particularly looking into the near future, and add a little bit what I was saying earlier. We are meant to be a globally cooperative movement, and there's going to be differences of opinion. There's going to be different moods. There are different cultures. We're global. You mentioned my traveling earlier. I know when I go to Germany, I'm ready to eat a lot of bread. There's going to be prasadam bread for breakfast. There's going to be prasadam bread for lunch, and there's going to be prasadam bread for dinner, and it's great. It's wonderful. Love it. When you go to Italy, there's going to be a lot of pasta. There's going to be a lot of lasagna. When you go to Bengal, there's going to be a lot of, well, actually, there won't be a lot of sabji. There's going to be a lot of rice with a little sabji on the side. Just an example of the kind of cultural differences are there. So without a rule of law, without a constitution, it's very easy for us to kind of get swayed into little pockets and, becoming little groups. And then we start thinking, we're the pasta people and we don't like the bread people, and we don't know if we trust the rice people. And that's Maya chips away, and we no longer are an international society for Krishna consciousness. The rule of law is a great concept, and another thing we have to be careful about too, say like in America now, the history of that country is when they wrote their constitution, it was right after the revolution, and they put a few things in there that were based on a certain time and place, about whether gun laws and things like that, not to get into a too controversial topic, but at the very least we have to see that the history and of that time led into a constitution that maybe today some of the things are a little difficult. And I think devotees to Mindy might say the same thing. There were certain things put in the Indian constitution that maybe need to be looked at a little more closely in terms of the current situation, which is all the more reason I just use those as examples that creating a constitution has to be something carefully thought out and not rushed.
You used the word controversial a couple of times. Let's take a look at you as it relates to controversy.
Well, I'm glad you're not interviewing my wife. She'll give you lots of controversies, but you're good to talk to me.
So first of all, you were very early on to become a strong proponent of child abuse.
Against child abuse.
Against, yeah, that's what I meant. Thank you for clarifying my words.
Communications, I got to watch those things carefully.
Yeah, and then also then related to abuse of women
domestic.
You became a proponent of women Diksha gurus. So in some ways, you're almost like a leader in some of these things that aren't necessarily broadly popular. How do you deal with all of that?
Well, I mean, again, I think part of it is because in my communications role, I meet a lot of Christians. I mean, I've been doing this, and I'm going to come to your point. I don't want to go off topic here, but I've been working on Christian Vaishnava dialogues for 25 years and Muslim Vaishnava dialogues for 10, 15 years. And doing those, you get the experience. Hey, these people are spirit souls too. These people have wonderful shastras. Some of it we don't necessarily agree with. The customs are different, but there's a lot of deep spirituality and God consciousness there. And Prabhupada said many, many times, we don't care what your religion is. It's whether developing love of God. That's the goal. And if you're doing it through this process or that process, the goal is love of God. So hearing that from my guru, Srila Prabhupada, reading that in his writings and experiencing that and interacting with people, it's helped me understand that we can't just say we're devotees of Krishna or we're a wonderful organization just because we say we are, or because we've got the deepest philosophy, therefore everything else we do is great. I mean, if I can tell a short story related to this.
Yeah, please.
One of the first dialogues we did with Christians was held in Massachusetts. We had some very big scholars there from Harvard, from other major scholars who were also Christian practitioners. Some may know the name Frank Clooney or Larry Shin or Gordon Milton. These are big people. And I helped organize it. So I chose the topic, and the topic was Kingdom of God, because I thought we've got a lot to show about the kingdom of God. God's blue, and he's got his mother and his father in the Jumuna River. And at one session, kind of going around in circles, one of the Christian participants said, well, my tradition doesn't actually get into a lot of details about that. And I was thinking, wow, but ours sure does. And then he said, but what's really important to me is trying to be a Christian or a God-loving person in this world, how I treat my neighbors, how I care for my family, how I'm concerned about children, and on. And as he was making those points, this was 1996. This is when child abuse in ISKCON was just coming, being generally aware there was a big problem there. And I kind of physically felt myself sinking in the chair, because I was in there going, we've got a lot to show, which we do. But then hearing from him, I realized we've got a lot to learn from them. Maybe they can tell us how to be better on this and better on this and better on that. So that led me to be, I think maybe it sensitized me to be aware that we have a wonderful philosophy. I'd argue, many devotees would argue, that the most profound revelation of God is there. It's not the only one, but it's the most profound. But that doesn't mean we don't need to work on other things. We have fantastic art teachers, and if our kids are getting beat in the classrooms, that's horrible. And that'll nullify and undermine everything we do. And, this in the same way, the fact that we have such a beautiful culture and philosophy, we came to understand that we have issues with domestic abuse. And not unlike other religious organizations, there's a lot of religious communities that kind of have this idea like, men are meant to be dominant, and for whatever reason, this and that's a whole nother discussion. But that can be misinterpreted to think that men can misuse, mistreat, or abuse women. Or sometimes there's just put that aside. There's just psychological issues that people, sometimes they come from an abusive family of their own, and oftentimes it carries into the next generation. So, I think we have to say, if people are going to take us seriously, people look at us, they don't necessarily walk in the door and say, wow, this is great. Krishna's, God's blue. I never realized it. Thank you very much. I think I want to join your organization. They don't do that. They come in and they say, how do they treat each other? How strong are their families? How they talk about loving God. Do they love each other? They talk about being good people. Are they, as you said earlier, rule of law? Are they law-abiding citizens? Are they nice? Are they nice people? And we think, well, I don't need to be nice because I'm chanting Hare Krishna. or I don't need to take care of my kids because I'm telling them about Krishna. So that's all they need is I just, sit down and chant japa. I mean, I've seen situations where parents walk in and say to a 6-year-old, be quiet, sit down, and don't move. And then they, literally torture their kids through a, 45-minute lecture that a lot of adults don't even want to go to. They're outside waiting for prasadam. So, just being sensitive to those things, being sensitive to the needs of children, being sensitive to the needs of each other, and underlying spiritual care is the most important thing. But if we really care about somebody spiritually, we have to care about them physically and emotionally and intellectually and all of those other things. So that really motivated me when these issues came up. Hey, we need to do something.
Mm-hmm. And when we look to Srila Prabhupada's example of engaging people in men's bodies and people in women's bodies, what's your understanding of what he did?
Yeah. My wife was personally in the room with Srila Prabhupada when he said, she was 16 years old at the time. And Prabhupada said, I want every one of my disciples to open a temple. And she said, I think he was still being referred to as Swamiji at that period, Swamiji or Prabhupada. She said, even the girls, Prabhupada or Swamiji? And he thought for just a second or two, and he said, yes, even the girls. Now, that would have been a perfect time for Prabhupada to say, well, of course not. Girls need to be protected. And it was girls. I mean, again, 16. I've got a 16-year-old granddaughter now. So, I in my mind, it's like, well, 16, that's like, that's a kid. But Prabhupada's like, no, you all have this ability to carry forward the mission. And there's a couple books coming out now. I haven't read them entirely, but I'm looking forward to it. One about some kind of academic articles written about Vaishnavis and written by Vaishnavis, and another memories of Prabhupada's women disciples. And I think we really need to look at that carefully, because Prabhupada had a bigger vision. Prabhupada's movement is not for Americans, it's not for Indians, and not for blacks or whites or this. Prabhupada's movement is meant for the world. And I think Prabhupada's like, we're not going to hold back and say, well, you can't do this. Like when I read Shyamasundar Prabhu's book, Prabhupada never told anybody, you can't do this. Prabhupada said, yeah, do it. Shyamasundar would say, Prabhupada, should we go to Africa? Or Prabhupada was thinking, should I go to Africa? Go here. And Shyamasundar would say, well, Prabhupada, I was thinking you have already been there. Maybe Africa. And Prabhupada said, yes, I was thinking the same thing. Book the tickets. So we had this exciting vision. So some 16-year-old Vaishnavi says, Prabhupada, you even want the girls to open temples? Yes, why not?
And by the way, your wife is Rukmini Devi Dasi, who is, of course, very famous devotee, joining very early on. And actually, the two of you have had such a nice partnership of accomplishing so much. For a while, you were even running a business and was thriving and doing really well, donating so much money to ISKCON and whatnot. Seems like you're just a fantastic husband. She's a fantastic wife. How do you get along for so long, so well?
Well, you're only getting one side of the answer, so you might have to talk to her about the other side. I mean, anytime there's a relationship, there's challenges. We've been married 35 years, and we have some differences in our moods, definitely. But I think, if someone kind of asks me, as I occasionally do, how do you make a marriage be successful, or how do you get into a situation for successful marriage? First of all, I tell people that haven't been married yet, you got to really communicate with each other. You can't assume because he's a devotee, she's a devotee, they're going to get along. So you need to ask each other how many kids you want. If she wants 8 and he wants none, or he wants 8 and she wants 1, they need to talk about that. Who's going to make the money? Right now, maybe, if we have kids, my mother quit and raised kids for 20 years. So I'm assuming that's what they're going to do. But maybe, your spouse just said, no, the kids are 4 years old, you're going to put them in daycare. Or, well, of course, as soon as we have kids, we're going to go back to India because that's a better place. Or we're going to move to the country. So all of these different things. And there's unlimited ways to practice Krishna consciousness as a couple, as a family. There's no stereotypical way to do it. And you mentioned I travel a lot. I've really been fortunate to meet grahastas around the world with so many different varieties. Some of them she's the breadwinner, and some of them she stays home and raises the kids. Some of them are both up at 5 o'clock in the morning milking cows, and they go to bed at 10 o'clock at night after cleaning the temple. And some of them are working both outside, and they're giving a lot of money, and they come to the temple once a week, and they do programs at home. So many varieties. So I think the key thing is learn to understand yourself, have a lot of communications what those mutual needs are. And then I think it's really important to understand this person's not in my life. This is not, my ultimate intimate partner is Krishna, and her ultimate intimate partner is Krishna. But we can be very dear friends, and we can help each other in this life and help each other connect to Krishna. But if I got some overestimation that, she's here to satisfy my whims, or that I'm here just to satisfy her needs. We should take care of each other and address each other's needs. But we have to remember, hey, first and foremost, I'm a servant. And we shouldn't think I'm the husband, so she's the servant. No. I'm the husband. I serve her, and she serves me. It's a mutual arrangement.
Really nice answer. Thank you so much. I'd like to just shift into our future, ISKCON's future. Maybe from a timescape, maybe it's 20 years, but maybe it's even more, 50 years. And then when we look around ISKCON today, what are the issues that you see that need to get resolved sooner or later so that our future is brighter? Srila Prabhupada said, the future is very bright. Yet at the same time, sometimes we look around ISKCON and say, whoa, what's going on here? So what are some of the issues that you see? What are some of the challenges that ISKCON has going out into the future?
Well, we just had Vyasa Puja, and this year is the 50th anniversary of the Governing Body Commission, the GBC. And I use that as an opportunity to write my Vyasa Puja about the GBC and about how important it was for Prabhupada. And it's interesting, Prabhupada created the GBC before he created the BBT. Not many people know that. And Prabhupada's experience coming out of the Gaudiya Math and as disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is that if you don't have a structure in place, it's not going to stay together. This is Kali Yuga, and the forces push people apart. And in my 22 years on the GBC, I've seen that. I think that's probably one of the most important contributions the GBC has made is when there's issues. Leaders have serious problems, or break laws, or do crazy stuff. There's a governing body, or philosophical debates come up. There's a governing body that can actually make a decision and hold everybody together. We may not agree with every decision, but there's a sense of commitment and working together. So I see the biggest threat from my perspective right now, looking into the future, is, as Prabhupada asked Giriraj Maharaj, and I know you like to tell the story, Gopal Bhatta, and I do too, will it carry on? And Giriraj Maharaj said, yeah, if we chant, if we're sincere, and Prabhupada said, yes, organization and intelligence. So I think the biggest challenge is our generation as Prabhupada disciples. One thing that Prabhupada drilled in us very deeply is this need to cooperate and to work under authority. I lived in a temple for 10 years, and I had some really, really wonderful temple presidents and some that weren't so good. But I knew I served Prabhupada through the temple president. And, devotees knowing I served ISKCON through those structures that Prabhupada set up. Of course, it doesn't mean, if somebody's abusive, this is a whole different thing. I'm the anti-abuse guy, also one of them. But having this structure, I see the big challenge: are we going to stay together? And there was a lot of challenges. In 1986, Kirtananda went off the deep end, and a whole community was expelled for a certain period of time, and it took some time to work that out. And, a lot of leaders have had difficulties and different kind of deviant, it's kind of a strong word, but, errant philosophies have come up. And a lot of times people get into some kind of party politics. I mean, there was someone a few years ago that was not authorized by anybody, but he was starting to kind of collect the disciples. And in Mayapur, he was telling his people, don't go listen to this Swami and this Prabhu and giving classes when you're all together. Come and hear me. I got my own little clique, even in Mayapur, the international headquarters. So those tendency to be separated are very powerful. And sometimes there's reasons. We don't go along with everybody. Sometimes people make mistakes. I think the biggest challenge is how we're going to keep the movement together. That's the biggest challenge.
And And when we say stay together, are we talking about a multifaceted element, or are we just saying, okay, we're going to move forward with all the love and trust needed and make sure that we are all happy?
Well, I like
When you talk about structure, what does that mean? Does that mean that maybe there's some rule of law, like we were talking about, number one, from a constitution that we all accept? But are there legal structures that we should be constructing? Are there operationals? Are there standards? Give us illuminate that a little bit more.
I think, Prabhupada told us, I think the underlying theme and the mood and the culture is love and trust. And at the same time, Prabhupada said systematically propagate spiritual knowledge. Early on, 50 years ago this year, right? Prabhupada established the GBC. He wanted to make structure, and he created temple presidents and all the different structures. And of course, those need to evolve a little bit as time goes on. Our board of directors in certain countries have more legal responsibilities and all that. But I think it's a blend of those. The culture, we can't become so stuck, as you mentioned earlier. Like we don't want to be some type of, government hierarchy that's oppressive, dictatorship. And we see those models in the world today. And at the same time, we know we can't get anything done if we don't have some organization. So we need to find an organization that enthuses, encourages, facilitates, trains. And like Prabhupada said, my ISKCON is meant to create independently thoughtful men and women. Independently thoughtful. So we're supposed to be independently thoughtful, but he wanted structure. So finding that balance of a good, like, in America, it's an ongoing thing in my life. We've seen it, like the country at least has this theme of freedom, but we know for a lot of people, there hasn't been a whole lot of freedom. And there's always an ongoing effort. So it's really an ideal. It's not like America is the place of freedom. It's a place that makes that an ideal. And it's been a struggle every generation to do that in the proper way. So I think in the same way within ISKCON, that mood needs to be love and trust, as Prabhupada told us, but we have to have structures, and the structures should facilitate individual creativity, but in a cooperative way. For instance, like these days, there's so many people doing, home programs and Bhakti-yoga and Nam-hatas and all that. But we also know, I set up some little program in my home. I started inviting my neighbors. Well, there needs to be some system. If we are an organization, there needs to be some system that I'm doing the right things. I'm saying the right things. I'm not just come up with some crazy idea. And we have this tendency in our community. We see it again and again. Oh, Anuttama is giving class. Well, then he becomes some kind of de facto guru. And people that don't know, they have a little awe and veneration. It's also part of our culture, a little veneration for people in a position of leadership. But there's got to be checks and balances in place. So, it's like a plant. You want to give it full room to grow, but you need some support, and sometimes you need some protection. And if the plant turns out to be a weed, you need a process to, trim it back and keep it in proper boundaries sometimes.
Mm. So, Prabhu, we're getting close to the end of our time. You have lived your entire life as a dedicated servant of ISKCON.
I had 20 years or so of nonsense, but enough to remind me I need to be a dedicated servant.
20 years before you joined.
My adult life spent in devotee.
Yeah. So working for ISKCON, never stopping. Tell us the importance of ISKCON and what has your realization of why you've been able to just stay nonstop working for what is the best organization in the entire world. Tell us about that.
Well, I think it starts with there's too much suffering in the world.
Mm.
Anybody that's even a little sensitive, you go outside and you look at the newspaper, you look on your computer, and the world's full of war and pestilence and famine and abusive and violence and hatred and anybody that is a little conscious, I think you kind of have a choice. Do we close off that? Do we just kind of ignore it and go on in our little bubble, trying to enjoy life as best we can? Or do we try to make a difference in the world? In my experience, before being a Krishna devotee, trying to make a difference I literally realized, okay, if I fast from lettuce, because the Latino movement, I'm trying to remember the wonderful leader that was there, his name's escaping me now, organizing the lettuce boycotts in California.
Cesar Chavez.
Yeah, Cesar Chavez. Thank you very much. If I put time there, well, but then there's a meeting on Friday night that help the black students deal with all the inequalities that are there. But at the same time, well, there's a meeting about the vegetarian people, about how they're abusing the bamboos in the forest. It was kind of overwhelming. So how do I try to alleviate this situation? So I believe Krishna consciousness in ISKCON is really this holistic vision of how everyone's connected to Krishna. And if we keep that in mind, we can treat everyone with respect and with appreciation and with kindness, and we can help lift everyone up according to where they are. And ISKCON is the organization that Prabhupada created to do that. And I mean, I'm rereading Lilamrita for about, I don't know, the 10th time. And I just read volume 1. I finished volume 1. I went back and read it again. Now I'm in volume 2 for the second time, in a row. And I just keep finding these little snippets of Prabhupada's genius. And I'll mention one if I can. Can I just tell a very brief?
Yeah, please.
These are kind of small things that really encourages me in my communications service. It's described that in 26 2nd Avenue in the very early days, I don't even know if they had initiation yet, the owner of the building, his name was, I think, Mr. Chuti. And Prabhupada told all the young devotees that they should be very respectful to Mr. Chuti, and they should treat him like their father. So they would say, you're our father, we're like your sons. Because Prabhupada knew this, we're having these loud kirtans, there's all these young people, the first wave of hippies are hanging out. People may not be real happy with this. So, this landlord is an important key audience, to use our term. We have to have a good relation with him. So it describes, Prabhupada told him, treat this man like your son. And then it explains Prabhupada would help Mr. Chuti with his personal tasks, including helping take out the neighbor's trash. Okay, that's a little tiny thing. But you think about Srila Prabhupada, pure devotee, translating all these books, going to be the law books for 10,000 years. He's trying to start this movement. He's got a million things to do. He just came from India. You don't even touch your own trash. That's something for a different class of people touch trash. Prabhupada's in New York. And again, this was before the era of trash bags. These days we all try to tie up this neat little plastic bag, at least in the Western countries. And Prabhupada was helping him he was so humble and so broad in his vision. Whatever it takes to create a favorable environment for our movement, whatever it takes to help this fledgling temple. So, when I see and hear those things about Prabhupada and see what he sacrificed for me and for others, and I see the vision that he had for ISKCON and mixed with this phenomenal culture and philosophy, what else can I possibly do? And at the same time, keep an open mind, where there's issues that come up, some domestic violence, maybe some, leaders are not being held accountable. Okay, let's fix it. Not that we become, unnecessarily critical. Oh, there's this problem, that problem. I'm going to sit back by the water fountain or the Sunday complain about this. Fix it. You see some trash on the ground, pick it up. Like I mentioned that anti-cult thing in 1996. There was an article in the New York Times and about ISKCON, at was our 30th anniversary. ISKCON at 30, real changes or just PR? Because we were putting out this information. We're maturing, we're more careful, we've got better families, checks and balances on leaders. So there was our New York Times, a pretty important paper. So I called up the reporter and I said, hey, Gus, I knew him personally. Why did he included a quote from an anti-cult person? I said, why did you have to include this? This is our 30th anniversary. Nothing's gone wrong in the last 3 years. Why'd you pull up this negativity? And he told me, he said, Anuttama, it's out there. You need to deal with it. So I got on the phone and started calling people. And, from there, the whole story progressed. Can I tell one other little story quickly?
Please.
Do we have time? Is it okay?
Yeah, please.
Because I think it kind of embodies a little bit this communications thing. So we called these people up and they said, okay, well, we'd like to meet with you. Why don't you, make an arrangement. We'll do a test with all the Hare Krishnas psychologically, see if you're okay. And I said, well, that's a little premature. Let's build a relationship. So there was a conference in Washington, D.C., an anti-cult conference. And I went, my wife went, and we had a good friend of mine, Hari Das, who was in a PhD program in pastoral counseling, educated man. Their perception in these days, 1996, Hare Krishnas aren't so educated. So I wanted to explain to them. So anyway, we sat down in this meeting, and the first question they asked us, because these are, a lot of perceptions weren't based on reality. They asked us, 1996, Anuttama, how's Kirtan Ananda doing? And I remember at the time, my kind of like my throat kind of choked a little bit. I remember feeling my temperature went up a little bit. And I said, well, actually, he's not a member of our organization anymore. He was removed 10 years ago, and these are the steps we put in place to avoid those kind of problems. And actually, the community he led is a very healthy one, and things are really moving forward. And by the way, he went to jail. And they said, oh, that's well, we didn't know all that. Thanks for telling us. And then a moment of silence. And I fully innocently, this was not pre-planned. Innocently, I said, well, tell me, Dr. Langoni, how's Ted Patrick doing? And they went, and their faces turned a little red. And they said, well, actually, we don't have anything to do with Ted Patrick anymore. He hasn't been a member of our organization for about 10 years. We don't agree with what he did. He broke a lot of laws. He went to jail.
Yeah, just to insert, Ted Patrick was the major deprogrammer of that time, so that the audience knows who he is.
And deprogramming mean at that area, literally, there were goondas that would kidnap people off the street. All well-intentioned, they're thinking these poor young people have, given their life to some crazy thing. They're vegetarians. How do you explain that? They must be brainwashed or something nutty. And they would kidnap people and try to, like we say, deprogram physically, psychologically, emotionally, force them to give up their faith. I mean, sometimes lock them in cottages. And it was terrible stuff. But in this context, we're saying, hey, we've had some elements that went rogue or did some bad stuff. We've dealt with it. And they were saying, we've had similar problems and we've dealt with it. So then we've understood, all of us around the table. Now we can talk. We're all human beings. You guys are actually trying to do the best you can, because there's sometimes religious communities, abuse people. And we've had that happen. In fact, a few years ago at the World Palm of Religions, I organized a conference at the World Palm of Religions, and I asked the head of this International Cultic Studies Association, I said, why don't you come and partner with me? We'll make a presentation to this, 900 religious communities that are there about how religious people need to be careful, because we can blow it sometimes. We can mistreat people, and we have to be careful of it. So we did, we partnered. He talked about what can go wrong, and I talked about how in ISKCON we've had our share of problems, and here's what we've done to kind of protect ourselves. Guru training, disciple training, all those kind of things. So,
so if there's any devotees out there that would like to spend some time working in the communications department or want to offer their service to help you because of just this interview, because we spent a fair amount of time talking about that communications. It's a constant thread in virtually everything that you're saying. Who should they contact? It's the ISKCONcommunications.org.
Yes, and we just actually, that website is just being revamped, and we thought we were going to launch it yesterday, but we have a couple more glitches. So in about a week, that'll be up there. They can go there, and that's also a great resource because it has things like a media kit. How do we reach out to the media? The 7 purposes are there. There's videos and different kind of things like that. And also, if I can put a plug in for devotees to read and take advantage and submit articles to ISKCON News, that's another thing that we do. That's a critical part of our ministry. And I know, it's being picked up by a lot of other websites, and ISKCON Connect.
ISKCON News is a very, very important website.
And
our GBC SPT COVID thing interfaces with them an awful lot. We work closely with Krishna Lila Devi and of course yourself as the head of it.
Yeah, and Madhava Smullins, our writer.
Great. Yeah, very good.
Madhava does a lot of writing. So yes, actually, and here's another thing devotees can do. We just last year, just in time for this crazy pandemic, the communications course, which not just you can hear the students that have taken it. It's a really wonderful course. It's available online through the Bhaktivedanta College. And we launched it about 2 months ago, and we can handle about 20 students at a time. and we did one batch and more people. So we're now on our 4th batch is coming up in just about 10 days or 2 weeks.
So if anybody wishes to inquire about that, how should they do that?
They can go to the Bhakti-yoga College at Radhadesh. I'm afraid I don't have the website off the top of my head, but just type in Bhakti-yoga College and type in communications course. And, there's a reasonable fee. I think it's $100 or €100. It's a 5-week course. It's all self-paced, lots of lectures, lots of exercises. And it's wonderful material. And it's the feedback we've gotten from the students has been very, very positive.
Right. Well, Prabhu, we thank you so much for your valuable time, all of your insights. It's actually been really illuminating and rewarding to just be speaking with you. I thank you so very, very much. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Gopal Bhatta. And thanks to yourself and the SPT team and all the efforts that you're doing. I know with these, I thought, especially this year, just looking at this one program with the GBC, that really was a wonderful opportunity, this being the 50th anniversary, to let devotees know more about what the GBC does, who the GBC members. So that's important. And also all the different things that are going on with the SPT and really helping to connect the movement on a global level. It's really wonderful. And
we're attempting to bring everyone together in these times when we appear to be all alone, but we are not all alone. We actually are all together. And, I mean, at this point, I think we have over 125 video conferencing events. We have over 170 missives or postings that we've put out. And we really want devotees to stay safe. This COVID is a really nasty disease. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. All glories to all the Vaishnavas. Hari Bol. Hare Krishna.